Welcome into the Hot Read podcast live here on Tuesday, November the 19th. I am your host, JT Ruhnke, producer and writer and reporter here at Broadway Sports Media and 440 Sports. You can follow me at JT_Ruhnke on Twitter. I'm once again joined by my lovely co-host who is rocking the awesome Reese Senior Bowl hat, Stoney Keeley, editor-in-chief over at Sobros Network, 1/3 of football and other F words, and co-writer over at stackingtheinbox.com. Stoney, how are you doing today, my friend?
Doing pretty damn good, JT. Feeling all right. Got back into a rhythm. As viewers know, my life has been quite tumultuous over the last couple of weeks, but it feels like we're finally settling down here. I'm back at the Sobros HQ. We're on schedule. We're on time. And I'm not running around like a chicken with my head cut off. So I'm feeling pretty good, man. And yeah, the Senior Bowl, the accepted invites are starting to trickle in. So I'm stoked, man. I'm paying attention to all that stuff. UConn's got him a right tackle that's going to be at the Senior Bowl that I can't wait to watch. I'm just stoked, man. I'm happy today. It's a good day.
I saw that there was also, I think, like a inline Y-type tight end that's also going to be there that you're pretty high on. Definitely something the Titans also need. Definitely should get a pick there. So, yeah, they're all coming in right now. And if you are joining us today in the conversation, like Joey is here in the comments talking about a certain Mr. Beat Kleekman, or, not going to say his name out, right? But if you are joining us today to talk about everything that happened in what some of the players have called a cursed Titans game this past weekend, join us live in the comment section on Broadway Sports Media or 440 Sports YouTube channel. And you can let it all out today as we dive into what I think was a progressive game for the Titans. I think they made progress in this game, whether or not the outcome dictates so. But before we get into all of that, got to give a wonderful shout out to our sponsors, Sinkers Beverages and Bluegrass Beverages, their sister store. More on them later. If you know 440 Sports, you know them for sure. But we'll get into all of the good stuff later on in the show. But we have to really talk about this Vikings-Titans game, because as much, we do this show on Tuesday, and, I do think that it's important to talk about, but I'm sure at this point, a lot of people have already heard so much, crying and moaning about the refs. And I do tend to agree that, yes, the officiating in this game was a big point of contention, and rightfully so. I mean, the Titans, 13 penalties for 91 yards in that game to the Minnesota Vikings, 3 penalties for 35 yards. And this game, I kind of changed my tune throughout the game, because as much as the penalties did impact what the Titans were able to do and the scoreboard in total, I did put out I decided to choose violence, and throw a little bit of a grenade on Sunday, where I said everyone can be mad about that call, which was, I'm referring to the Mike Brown unnecessary roughness call, which, incredible gaslighting by the NFL afterwards in that pool report done by Nick Suss. Have to give it to him, just generational gaslighters, and they'll always be known as such. Have to give them props there. But then again, in that first half, as much as the penalties were racking up, whether it be on Jarvis Brownlee Jr. going up against Justin Jefferson, which we'll get into, or the Mike Brown penalty, it really felt like it wasn't going to matter, because the Titans just simply could not move the ball. And so I put this tweet out, more so meaning that if the Titans can't actually, start to convert on these third downs and make drives out of this, what does it really matter that this ends up, these penalties end up mattering? Well, you get out of halftime, and I don't know about you, Stoney, but it really does feel like the Titans came out and played the better half of football in that second half against the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, they outgained them by at least 100 yards in that second half, controlled the clock and the time of possession, and then you get into some more offensive penalties now on that side, and it really does feel like at the end of the game, I was changing my tune. Like, okay, you showed me enough in that game on Sunday to where the penalties definitely did matter, and that you can be outraged about it. And this was, for lack of a better term, I do think the best all-around effort the Titans put together this season in a win or a loss. And I think you can debate whether or not the emotions of that Patriots game could outrank this one. But I think top to bottom, especially in that second half, you have to look at what the Titans did from the quarterback to the offense to the defense, and they really started to play some complete complementary football.
Yeah, it felt like the first time this season that we'd really seen them put it all together at the same time. I thought the offense was moving pretty efficiently. I thought the defense was playing well enough to win that game. Special teams, not an outright disaster, actually looked okay there. They actually played better football later into the game. We haven't been saying that a lot about this team this season. They're usually folding at halftime. But this was the opposite of that. They really rose up and they battled through. I thought it was particularly encouraging that some of the big plays started hitting. And yeah, one of those was called back because of a penalty. But you're talking about a team that has looked a little listless at times. And there have been a myriad of issues plaguing this team at any point during any of these games prior to this. But today was, or this week was not that game where you could say, was one of 8 to 9 different things, different swings that cost them the game. It was the same issues that have been plaguing them all season long. Problems on the right side of the offensive line, virtually no threat on the edge on defense, and penalties, and coming to rear its ugly head again. Those issues to me were magnified by the fact that they played better elsewhere throughout the game. It's like, you can't look at any of these other issues and say, well, maybe if that swings another way, the outcome is different. No, they played a complete game. They played well into the second half of the game. It just came down to personnel issues that we've said on this show for several weeks. They're not going to be able to fix until we get to another player acquisition cycle. That said, those issues still plaguing this team, they had a chance to win it. The Mike Brown penalty was on 4th and goal. It's called. The Vikings get a fresh set of downs. They end up scoring a touchdown. Will Levis throws a bomb to Calvin Ridley. That gets taken off the board. You're talking about a 14-point swing in this game that the Titans ended up losing by 10. So, I don't like being blame the refs guy. In 9 out of 10 cases, I'm not going to be that guy. But I think you have a gripe when you play as well and as solid, as unified as the Titans did on Sunday, and you lose that game the way that you did. It's hard not to point the finger at the Zebras on this one.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you there. And Joey here in the comments saying we're entering the spin zone, where he says refs actually did us a favor. We were dangerously close to winning that game, probably speaking from the stink for Shedeur, collapse for Cam, whatever you want to talk about this week in that carousel of maybe kind of sort of bad quarterbacks in college right now. But for the guys who are on the field, who this game really matters because there are jobs still on the line. As a 2-8 team, there are people playing for their jobs and playing for these guys day in and day out. And you hear from a guy like a team captain like Jeffrey Simmons, who talks about how frustrating it is to play this well and feel like you outplayed your opponent and have it come back because of the officiating, which is something that has happened time and time again over this season for the Titans. It feels like the entire world is against you. And so here's what Jeffrey Simmons had to say post-game in the locker room after that.
Talk about officiating, but at the end of the day, everybody got to be held accountable. Maybe some of them, but a lot of them calls in that game, we disagree on it. But at the end of the day, I feel like we still had a chance in that game. I think they only got a field goal in the second half. We came as a defense, we're going to keep playing. It's hard. It's hard when you getting them type of calls, when you're making plays, you're ready to get off the field on 3rd down, whatever it may be, and we get a penalty. And some of them were late. It's like we coming off the field, I'm celebrating and they come a flag. So it's like things like that, man, is out of our control. I think we cursed when it comes down to officiating right now. So that's just my opinion on that. Like I said, we can't speak too much on it because we know NFL waiting to find us for that. So
I mean, pretty blunt and frank there from Jeffrey Simmons, but it does feel like you do everything that you feel like you're doing correctly, and it just ends up being a back-breaking one over and over again, whether it is the Mike Brown one where, yeah, I mean, it is a bad explanation after the game. His feet never leave the ground, even though his heels are up off the air. That foot is still on the ground. That is technically he is on the ground there. Does everything he's supposed to do there correctly. You look at, we can get into the Isaiah Prince ones, which I want to touch on here in a second. But the ones I will give the officials and the ones I will give the Minnesota Vikings there are the 2 pass interference calls, which are kind of ticky-tacky, could have gone either way. However, like we saw that coming, man. I feel like that's just going to be part of the game when you're going up against a guy like Justin Jefferson. Like Justin Jefferson is so good that he's going to command those penalties even when they aren't penalties. Like he is just that good of a receiver to where you have guys like Jarvis Brownlee Jr. and Darrell Baker going up against him, and you're going to get those calls because of how he's able to get past you and how he plays his style. And I was talking with Braden Gall here at 440 when we were in the game. We felt like, wow, you probably could have maybe not thrown those flags. Then again, it's a 5th-round rookie up against arguably the best wide receiver in football right now. There really wasn't any chance that a guy like Jarvis Brownlee Jr. was going to get the benefit of the doubt in those situations. And the way that he commands and he plays the game, I don't know, Stoney, maybe you disagree with me on that one, but it felt like those were the kind of things that you just still, like, either way, you feel helpless because you're still rolling out, your cornerback 3, 4, and 5, the best wide receiver in the league. Those things are going to happen.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, I don't really have a problem with those penalties being called or being committed, because I think you probably take those when you have the matchups you have. You don't really want to change too much of how these guys are guarding Justin Jefferson. You probably realize you might need to commit a penalty to stop him. If you're playing that style, it was effective for most of the game. I thought they actually did a pretty good job on Justin Jefferson in situations where Darrell Baker Jr. is one-on-one with him in the red zone, and they throw that corner fade Justin Jefferson's way, and Baker shuts it down. That's a style of play thing, man. It was physical. He noticed the alignment. You see him take a step outside to get the leverage and kind of force Jefferson to have to go a little further out, disrupt the timing down the field. And then when they get to the point of the catch, like he's all over Jefferson. And when that ball comes in, he plays the arms and not the ball. And he notices Jefferson wobbling that ball, bats the hands down, forces an incompletion. It's a clean play. You don't want to go to a guy, at least in my opinion, and say, hey, you need to change the way that you're playing because you might get called for a flag or two. You just eat the penalties because, yeah, maybe you get one flag thrown your way, committed a penalty, but then maybe you stop him 3 or 4 times playing the style that you do. So I don't think you want to get into a guy's head too much when you're going up against Justin Jefferson. He's one of those type of players to me that you just kind of know he's going to eat some in this game.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And as Roshan says here in the comments, Darrell Baker has low-key been a nice find, though. Massively better depth than a Trey Avery, etc. I would definitely agree with you there. However, they do command those penalties, and Justin Jefferson does get those calls. It's unfortunate that both those calls come on pretty critical 3rd downs where the Vikings end up getting new life and making points out of them. Of course, on the first one against Jarvis Brownlee down the sideline, the very next play is the 47-yard Jordan Addison touchdown, where they get a quick score there. And then later in the game, it's one that gives them new life, and they're able to drive down the field even more so and get Cam Akers into the end zone and really kind of seal the deal on the game, so to say. So yeah, it is tough, and I get the frustration of a guy like Jeffrey Simmons who feels like they get off the field and then they get back on and they aren't able to execute as well as they thought they were, because let's face it, they thought they were going to get the stop there and they were going to get their offense a chance. And so it's hard to feel like they aren't cursed there in that respect. I'm interested to get your thoughts on the offensive side of the ball with these Isaiah Prince penalties. It really, as I went through this game, it's so ticky-tacky to me. And I see people online and on Twitter talking about, well, his head is behind Latham's and his body isn't exactly here and he's too long. Like, I mean, at what point do you really start to not feel like, as Chef Rand points out, it feels like after Cali exploded on the sideline, they kind of held a grudge. And from things we've heard from RK Dub yesterday with Ramon Foster and some of the other things that we've heard, it feels like it may have, in fact, just not been unfair to the Tennessee Titans. And of course, the times they decide to make those calls, it costs the Titans 80 total yards on those plays called back and a touchdown, like you said, to Calvin Ridley. And so, I wanted to talk about, sort of NPF and this Isaiah Prince rotation maybe being the root cause of him having those issues, or maybe the refs calling it simply because they were also fed up with the rotation. But at the end of the day, it really didn't feel like those needed to be called whatsoever.
Yeah, it's really frustrating too, because this is one area that the NFL officiating has said they wanted to make a point of emphasis for 2024. And if you think back to the season opener, they were calling it left and right against the Kansas City Chiefs, but it doesn't feel like it's been much of an issue since then. So for me, it's the consistency thing. And I do think it is convenient that these ticky-tack calls, these flags were being thrown after the blow up on the sideline, and in critical moments of the game where it just seemed like, why now? Why the flag in this instance when you probably could have been calling this the entire game? You probably could have been calling this the entire season, and it just doesn't feel like that's been the case. So I look at this and think, I hate to breathe life into it, but I can at least, from a fan's perspective, I can understand looking at this and being frustrated, feeling like they're trying to send a message to Brian Callahan. I can understand that. At the same time, I don't know. I don't know what's going on with the right tackle spot. I mean, this was like the worst rotation of guys that they've put out there yet. I watch NPF have no change of direction in reacting to a pass rush. He runs to a spot and the guy just sidesteps and gets around him, and he's still like holding his hands out forward like he doesn't even realize the guy's around him. The anchor has been an issue with him all season long. Isaiah Prince, I didn't think was impressive with his anchor. There was a play that he just kind of gets punched, hand up the middle, inside, stiff arm from a pass rusher, and he ends up on his tail end on the ground. And I'm like, I understand wanting to give somebody the chance to win the job because nobody's won the job just yet. And I know Leroy Watson was dealing with a back issue, but man, it just feels hopeless right now. I don't know that there is a guy or a combination of guys on the roster that can fix this. I think John Ojukwu and Leroy Watson have been their best, most productive combination when they're rotating guys. We haven't really, Leroy Watson hasn't proved that he can't commit penalties either. So it just feels like a new flavor and a new style, whether it's false start, whether it's holding, or whether it's illegal formation, that sort of thing. You want to talk about curses, buddy. The real curse is at right tackle for this team.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you there. And I think it's really interesting. It's hard for, I do think Paul Kuharsky in the post-game presser offered up a pretty decent question as to Brian Callahan, saying, hey, we understand that you're the head coach of this football team, but at the same time, Rand Carthon is supposed to build the roster, and he willingly let you have this situation right now. And it's a tough one. And I do think that we can look back on our maybe old episodes and what we were talking about in May and June, and man, maybe I don't know what happened, because I feel like really everyone in Nashville and around the team felt like MPF could be serviceable at least. And maybe it is because he missed a heck of a lot of time early on in the off-season programs where he just simply was never able to catch up, and he's just fallen more and more behind on those type of things. But there's just no fixing it right now. And so,
yeah,
I mean, what do you think you're like? This is where my frustration with it is right here. And before we talk a little bit more about this right tackle situation, here's what Brian Callahan had to say about the tandem after the game on Sunday.
Challenging, it makes it hard for us to operate sometimes. It's a position that's by far the weakest link up front right now, and we're trying every which way we can to see if we can solve it, and thus far I haven't been able to. And we help over there a bunch, try to run the ball, we try to do a lot of things that keep them out of harm's way. But every now and again, you have to drop back and pass, and you can't help every edge, and you guys out in the pattern, and we struggle in those spots sometimes, particularly the 2-minute drill at the end of the half. So yeah, it's a position that we're trying our damnedest to figure out and help us, and right now it's not quite been good enough.
I really don't feel bad for him, because once again, what is he supposed to do? He's not the one who's making the roster. He's not the one, unless we don't know this behind closed doors, but we've been told that guys like Chad Brinker and Rand Carthon are the guys that are the ones putting this roster together. And so, it's like, what can they really do? Like, was this a thing where they really bought into the Bill Callahan can fix anything? He's got the Midas touch and just decided not to address it that much? Or really is it a thing where MPF simply has lost all his ability that they thought he could have early on in the offseason process? And so, like, I can't blame the guy for just having zero answers, because I mean, I don't know what, if I was the head coach, what I would be able to do about it. I wasn't the one who put the roster together. And so, like he said, I mean, you have a guy like when he's saying you have a lot of help, and believe me, they helped a lot. They had a lot of 2 tight end formations on the right side where they lined up both Nick Vannett and Chigakonkwo many, many times. I was charting this game for fantasy points this weekend, and the amount of two backs and the amount of wing formations where they had 2 tight ends out on the right and left sides here in this game, man, it was crazy to see. And that maybe is a testament to this Vikings defense and things like that. But like, you look at what they were able to do in the rushing game as well, where Will Levis ends up being the best rusher in this game on like 4 carries. And, that kind of tells the tape, they weren't able to establish any sort of run. And so there really is no possible way for you to help the right tackle situation there going forward. And so, Stoney, I want to ask you, out of all the options right now, you have to, because, it seems like as much as I want them to just with one of the bad right tackle options they have, because I think consistency could be key here, and you gotta stick it through the suck of this right tackle spot. Doesn't seem like that's what they want to do. Let's say Leroy Watson comes back healthy. Who are your 2 options going forward that you think they should just, as long as they stay healthy, these are the 2 options because they give you the most upside? And this is, kind of the bandage we're going to have to put on for the rest of the season.
I mean, if you're asking me, it's Leroy Watson and John Ojukwu, but they don't seem high on John Ojukwu at all. He wasn't active for this game, if I'm not mistaken. They really just trotted out NPF and Isaiah Prince, and I don't think NPF did anything to erase the stink from earlier in the season that he still has on him. And Isaiah Prince, just I figure he's probably going to be the guy that they continue to give looks to, because he hasn't had the opportunities yet, and they are still trying to get him up to speed, so to speak. But I don't know, man. The best tape that I've seen has been between Leroy Watson and John Ojukwu. And I know there are some questions about power, the ability to sustain blocks with Ojukwu. I see it on the tape, but I don't know how you can keep going back to some of these guys that have, like, by far looked so much worse, like NPF and the stuff with Isaiah Prince, where you have him saying, like, you just got to get up to the line, like repeatedly doing the same stuff. I don't know how that's forgivable, because that's not just like an understanding the playbook thing. That is like basic formations, personnel groupings, that sort of thing. I don't know how you look past it, but they seem to be out on a Juku. I would say Watson is probably the guy for now, with Prince getting a look in relief, but it's not the two that I would go with. And for what it's worth, I think from a roster building standpoint, I think that this regime was obviously high on NPF and his level of talent, but the most productive we've seen the guy was in a different running system. It was a lot more zone heavy that relies more on the athleticism and less on the technique, the anchor, the ability to just displace a dude, blow him back. I almost said blow his back out again. I always say that. Blow a dude back. NPF doesn't have that. He's a better athlete, moving laterally, side to side, and that sort of thing. So it just seems like there was a major oversight there, that they just thought they could take the talent and plug him into a new system, and it hasn't worked so far. So I don't know what you do until you can get to another player acquisition cycle.
No, I definitely agree. And we have a lot of comments in the comment section here talking about this right tackle debate and the situation. I guess it's not really a debate. It's just a therapy session at this point. And if you're watching live on X or Facebook and want to join the conversation, like Logan and Ed and Chef Fran and all these guys over here, head on over to Broadway Sports Media or 440 Sports YouTube channels, where you can join the conversation. Like Ed Henry saying, watching NPF is like watching a little boy in a pool playing Marco Polo, and everyone's gotten out but him. And I feel like that's an incredible comp. Logan saying NWI at right tackle, he'll hang up and listen. Hey, listen, I mean, the streets are saying that NWI is, is the guy you want out there above all other wide receivers. So, who knows if he can play a little bit there. Logan saying, do you think the tight ends were refusing to help NPF, similar to a longest yard situation? I mean, it's really hard to give, this is an interesting one, because for as much as they were lining up two tight end sets next to a guy like NPF or Isaiah Prince, it was in passing downs where it was trying to maybe kind of fake out a defense based on disguise, where both tight ends would immediately go to run routes afterwards. Like, there wasn't a lot of help there. So it was half and half still. It doesn't matter if you're helping him. If the guy NPF or Isaiah Prince is supposed to block, just blows right past him. What are the two tight ends supposed to do at that point? So it's very tough there. Ed, going back to yet another conversation that on paper maybe makes sense, but and maybe the scheme isn't the best representation of it, but he's saying at this point, I wouldn't mind seeing Levin at right guard and Radens at right tackle. As much as you want to try to fix this hole, you're going nowhere this season. You might as well continue to develop Radens at the position he's shown at least a little bit of life at, versus moving him to fix a hole, because, your season's going nowhere. It's not that's the one area I think I would say this Titans team is seeing what they have, and that is Dylan Radens right now at right guard, seeing if he can be a long-term answer. And so for them to not move him, I think, is the idea behind that one. A lot of comments here about your choice of words. Eddie saying, kind of ironic, Radens was in the doghouse with the old staff and now looks good in MPF in the doghouse with the new. I think it's a great point when you bring up the kind of scheme they're now running. I think that's definitely a good reason. And I think that's something that we may have to look more in depth on as we go throughout the season, and as we look back at what has been good in this system and what has not. I think that's going to tell a lot about where they look for a new right tackle in the offseason. But like you said, it's really, really hard to do until we get to a new acquisition cycle. And I think that's enough right tackle talk, because we always seem to spend so much time on it. It certainly makes me, it throws me through a doozy, but that's okay. And if you want to, hey, but we have the perfect fix for that. You know what it is, Stoney? It is our wonderful sponsors, Sinkers Beverages and Bluegrass Beverages. Sinkers Beverages, of course, has been serving the East Nashville community for over 40 years. They are a 4-time Best of Nashville Liquor Store of the Year, including this year, 2024. Absolutely the best selection of beer, wine, and spirits I have ever seen in Nashville. Simply one of the nicest and most variety in Nashville. You got to go check them out. And when you do, you got to go sign up for their in-crowd for special benefits, allocations, as well as their bi-weekly tastings that you can only know about and only get in on if you join their in-crowd. Also got to give them a follow on social media for special events and things like that. On Twitter, it is at SinkersBev, and on Instagram at sinkers.nashville. And then if you can't make it out there, no worries. They deliver the booze to you. Simply search Sinkers on Uber Eats, and they drive so you can drink responsibly, even if Cleet Blakeman is telling you otherwise and activating your inner demons in there. But hey, don't worry about that. You still got to drink responsibly there. Thank you to Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville as well, their sister location, who have been serving that area for over 50 years, helping out the local community, local businesses, helping out other local podcasts here. Love to see it. Thank you once again to Sinkers and Bluegrass Beverages. Anyway, Stoney, I do think it's time. I know I was teasing this a little bit earlier, but it's time for a brand new segment here on the Hot Read podcast that I'm really excited about, because even though we spent half an hour, I said we weren't going to spend a lot of time on the penalties and whatnot. We ended up spending like 25 minutes on penalties in this game. The bottom line is that there was a lot of progress, I think, in this game. You can look and you can see a lot of things that the Titans did really well. And I think that you pointed out a lot of them great, and you have a lot of notes in your notebook after rewatching this game. And so that's why this week we are going to unveil a brand new segment we like to call the Titans Notebook with Stoney Keeley. And as we see, we have this wonderful new graphic with Stoney in the Titans in the movie Notebook here. And we are going to break down everything that Stoney saw this week from this game, what he liked, what maybe he didn't like, things like that from this game. And so without further ado, Stoney, we're going to start off. Where do you want to head first with this matchup?
Doesn't matter to me. Whatever's easiest for you to pull up, JT.
Oh, great. Well, then, let's start with T'Vondre Sweat, because even though the pressure wasn't the best this week, I do think T'Vondre Sweat has shown a lot over the past couple of weeks. It really feels like, we've seen this guy continue to get better and better over the past couple of weeks, just with his raw power. It's the things we kept talking about from the Senior Bowl on. And, it feels like, as much as I think I saw somebody tracking this, that they had, I think, 4 almost sacks on Sam Darnold in this game. And simply because there just is no outside pressure in this game, T'Vondre Sweat's not able to get there because of, his size and, how his body dictates that. But still, like, the pressure we're seeing is really good from him so far.
Yeah. And then another layer of that is that when you do generate the pressure up the middle on a guy like Sam Darnold, if there's nobody on the edge to contain, it gives him a pretty clear exit plan. And I felt like that's what he was doing all afternoon on Sunday. What I found particularly impressive about T'Vondre Sweat is his hands. I've been a big fan of his hands as a sort of pass rush tool. I think he's got a really good cross swipe. I think he can bat those hands down, stab a shoulder, displace an offensive lineman, make him pay for it. The raw power is there, and we've seen those moves on his Texas tape in the pass rush, but using his hands against the run to disengage, to shed blockers, to toss dudes down, force runners back inside where another Titan cleans up on the tackle, that sort of thing was particularly impressive to me. And I think it's one of those things that people just kind of put him in a box as this like big run stuffing defensive tackle. But I thought this game really highlighted his hands and how he's able to use those to not only rush the passer, but to also disengage, shed a block, and get to the ball carrier as well.
Yeah, I do think, like, once again, like, the pieces are in place, and Jeffrey Simmons was once again very had high praise for the rookie, and he continues to get high praise because even though he's not exactly racking up things on the stat sheet, like he is playing as advertised, that I think we all could have seen. And simply, if a lot of the other pieces around him would simply click as well and play to their potential, we could probably see more stats from guys like Harold Landry and Arden Key and those guys. But I mean, specifically, we've seen the command of double teams over the past couple of weeks that he has been getting. I think that's one of the biggest things we've seen so far from him, that, with another year, another acquisition cycle, when we get to the draft talk, we're going to talk a lot about edge rushers, because I do think in a bad class, there has been decent talk about some of these edge rusher coming out, maybe some hidden gems for the edge rushers. So, I like what we're seeing from T'Vondre Sweat, and especially in this game. And Logan saying Sam Darnold was Weichel Vick, like that dude. I was beside myself sometimes with how he was being that mobile and getting out of these positions. And so, I think if he can get one more second on him or one more hand on him, I feel like we would have seen T'Vondre Sweat maybe rack up some other things on the stat sheet here. Let's move over to the other side of the line here and talk about Peter Skoronski, who has continued to have, I think he's had some good games, but specifically this play, which I absolutely loved. I'm glad that you pointed it out too. I noticed it immediately right there. The absolute, like, I'm going to still finish out the play and find someone to absolutely pancake into the ground like that, to kind of give Will Levis a little bit more time to get the first down and make some moves with his feet. I think over the past couple of weeks, we've seen Peter Skoronski continue to get better and better.
Well, yeah, and in this play in particular, it's just, I mean, you think about how these guys have to see the field and process things that are happening in just a matter of a split second. And what I really liked about this play is how he does kind of pass the rusher off to J.C. Latham. And you see Latham take over. He trusts Latham in that matchup, but then he immediately gets his head around afterwards, and he's like, okay, I'm looking for work. I got to find somebody to hit. And he just happens to catch a guy mid-jump and just decides, you know what? I'm going to just push this guy, shove him into the dirt, put him on the ground. And it's a case where, if that guy was still on 2 feet, you watch the angle of Levis's run here, he might have been able to make a play and stop this from getting the yardage that it did. So it's just real good head on a swivel stuff, identification, processing from Peter Skoronski, trust in J.C. Latham, and communicating and passing off those assignments, but still finding somebody to hit, man. That's good offensive line play right there.
As ugly as this offense sometimes is, watching the line is, I think it's one of the best parts of rewatching the tape, especially, like, I think you bring up a great point. Like, the development of J.C. Latham and that connection with Peter Skoronski on the left side is something that has happened over the past couple of weeks that I think is going to be invaluable when we talk about this team going into next year and how this offensive line can only improve and go up from here. Like, that is like, even in this lost season, another thing that we can still look for and Titans fans can have hope for, especially in this season, is seeing these young guys who, maybe he isn't the all-star 11th overall pick worthy guy that you think he may be, but we're seeing the trends go in the right way, and we're going in the right direction with him and a guy like him. So really good to see there. Next guy let's talk about, and this one is the talk of the town today. NWI having one of the Titans' biggest receptions of all time. It ties the longest reception, I believe, in franchise history, going back to 1962. But Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, also the longest play from scrimmage this year of any team in the NFL. I mean, talk about a team that felt like, when I watched this at the game, it felt like a lot of us were ready to stick a fork in this team. It was like, they're not going to be really able to do anything to get back in this game, even if they wanted to. Penalties be damned, because they're backed up. You watch Tony Pollard, by the way, barely get out of the end zone. I mean, Dylan Radins and Daniel Brunskill get absolutely blown up at the line. Tony Pollard barely manages to escape a safety there. Then they go with the QB sneak on second down, and they're at their 1 or 2 yard line, and this is not a play I think anybody was expecting. I know my jaw was dropped simply because I was in disbelief of what was going on. And as you see a little bit there, he talked about it in his post-game availability that Nick Westbrook-Akine, he's in the hot diggity dog from Mickey's Mouse Clubhouse, which I thought was a nice little touch there. Stoney, your thoughts on Nick Westbrook-Akine's play over the past couple of weeks, and some thinking that he may be even better than Calvin Ridley on this team right now?
I don't think that, JT, and I hate that it's come to this because I don't want to disparage the good name of Nick Westbrook-Akine. I think, listen, man, this is a guy that his entire career, he's just kind of hung around the roster. And every year it seems like he gets a new one-year deal. But looking at how he's excelling in this offense because of the way he does multiple things well, I think he's a good fit. I think he's got some chemistry going with Levis. I think that he's earned the trust of this coaching staff. And I think it's about time we talk about a longer-term deal for Nick Westbrook-Akine than just 2 or 3, or than just the one-year deals that he's been getting. Give him a 2 or 3 year deal. See what he can do, because he's earned it. I will say, in this tremendous concentration to haul that thing in, you notice him tuck the ball in his outside, his right arm. So if anybody catches him from behind, forces a fumble, that thing's more likely to go out of bounds. And then the wheels, man, NWI, listen, I'm not going to go out here and call him a burner because I know his separation numbers are not exactly that great. But when he has a lane like this, when he has a free run, I think he's faster than people give him credit for. And that's the case with a lot of aspects of his game. He's sneaky, better than people think he is. And I'm just happy to see it for a guy like this, that all of the hard work, the teammates seem to love him, rally around him too. For all the work that the guys put in, it's turning into production, and he's producing for this offense right now, and he just might play himself into a contract.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And Z-Dean in the comments here, welcome back. Good to see you, Z-Dean. He says, Ridley, NWI, and Oliver are the best wide receiver trio in the league. I mean, the streets are saying that NWI, put him up there against Zay Flowers and the George Pickens of the world, even the Devontae Adams of the world, and NWI would cook them in his current state. I will, out of this list that a supposed person put together today on Nashville Airways, I probably would give him credit on saying NWI right now is playing better than an injured Michael Pittman. And that's as far as I will go on a certain list. And even then, I think it's a debate. But right now, considering the quarterback play, considering where he is on his team right now, considering the injury, I feel like I would take NWI right now over Michael Pittman. And certainly you're getting a better deal on him right now than that Michael Pittman contract that he signed earlier this offseason, or last year. I do like Chef Rand's comp here. NWI is an Alan Lazard kind of guy, and I don't know if that's backed up by any comp. It just when you look, it feels like him. That's a vibes take, and I'm here for it. But I think that segues into our last guy that I want to talk about, and you want to talk about here with the Titans notebook. Let's talk about some Will Levis, because plays like this, those deep ball plays, we're finally connecting, and we were seeing them hit. And Brian Callahan continued to compliment Will Levis on his ability to make those plays. Will Levis, we're gonna finish the show here after we get done with the Titans notebook, but this is the second game in a row where you've seen Will Levis make some throws that say this guy, he could put it all together.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that was the encouraging aspect, something that I would be curious to hear from the coaching staff. Were these shots more calculated, dialed up, because they're saying, okay, Will Levis is back, he's gotten into a rhythm, we've seen him kind of manage the game a little bit better against the Chargers last week, now let's start dialing some of this stuff up? Or was this simply a Will Levis thing where these opportunities have been there, he just hasn't been taking them, but now things are slowing down to the point where he feels comfortable taking them? I don't know, but for whatever reason, these deep plays, these big chunk plays against a damn good defense, mind you, we can't lose sight of that in the grand scheme of this conversation. The Vikings are a good football team, but the fact that several of these big plays in the passing game are starting to click, I think is encouraging for his development. It's something that we haven't seen up to this point this season.
No, I definitely agree. And you bring up a great point. I feel like this was a game we were talking about on Friday where, a guy like Will Levis could struggle against a defense like this. And when rewatching the tape, you look at how many disguised looks where they put all the linebackers, they put the guys on the line, and then have 2 to 3 guys drop back in coverage. Like, this is a tough defense to go up against, especially because you also have some linebackers playing in the slot and covering wide receivers. It's a tough defense to decipher at the line of scrimmage. And for a decent part of this game, I don't think I would go as far and say the first half was anything exciting, but the second half, I think Will Levis really had a pulse on this defense that I would say, basically, you could look at any guy on this defense, maybe an Ivan Pace Jr., which, once again, why did he not go? Why did he go undrafted? You'll get a guy like Blake Cashman, who's playing some of his best ball right now. Jonathan Grenard, who can be in coverage, but also play anywhere on the front of the line. You look at guys like Andrew Van Ginkel. Like, these guys basically could line up and play anywhere on the line of scrimmage. And like, that's what we were seeing happen in this game. And for the better part of it, like, I think Will Levis operated this offense in a manner that I would have expected anyone to operate going up against this Minnesota defense. Did he not?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a step forward from what we've seen earlier on in the season. I think this kind of opens the door for a trickier conversation that I don't know if we have time for today, but I think, if he continues on this trajectory, and as Jay Nelson points out in the chat, maybe the 2 best defenses in football that they've played the last 2 weeks. And I think they've been his 2 best games of the season so far. If he keeps pushing this way, do we start to have that conversation about, does he get another shot in 2025? Because when you look at this draft class, I don't know if Shedeur Sanders is going to be worth the number 2 overall pick when you have an edge rusher there that you might could take instead. If you don't get Shedeur Sanders, I don't think there's anybody else in this class right now that looks like a bona fide starter. Don't know what you could do in free agency. So, I mean, maybe we're starting to kind of change the conversation at the quarterback position a little bit because of how well Levis has played against these 2 defenses. And then to further that point, if he goes on to play worse defenses and continues to look better, this conversation could go to a place that I did not think it was going to go several weeks ago.
Yeah, no, I think that has been a surprise to all of us. And if you want to save that conversation, I think it's one that we can at least start at the end of this episode. And that was your notes from this game. I thought, that's a lot of the progress you want to see from a lot of these guys. And if you guys like this segment and the graphic down in the below, I do believe it. I like it a lot. So we'll have to do this more often going forward. I do think that it is a conversation to be had right now, because you kind of talk about Will Levis, and as Kenneth said earlier in the day, please don't tell me we are seriously starting the Levis 2025 Titans quarterback 1 talk. People have lost their minds. I find it hard not to, as we continue to see him, this is a guy who, shouldn't really feel bad for him, but like in his post-game press conference, like, this was a guy who felt so frustrated and really defeated, because this is a guy who, there was a lot riding on his shoulders coming into the year. And the fact that we're 11 weeks in, and even though he hasn't started every game, he hasn't won a single game for this team. Like, that has to weigh heavy on a guy like that. And a guy especially who is as competitive as he is and uses that as motivation. Like, this is a guy that I think is on the upward trajectory of being at his peak performance this season. Like, I think he is right now, at least mentally, locked into a place where those boneheaded mistakes we saw earlier in the season, and especially that interception at the end, once again, I don't really blame him for that. That was a play that I think could have worked. I still, when I watch the tape, have, especially on some of those where Will Levis is throwing them up, I have questions as to the work ethic and how much Calvin Ridley is really trying to go get those. That's a conversation for another day as well. But like that one, I really am throwing that one away as well. But like this is a guy who, if we, like he said, like you have Houston next week. Like let's say, because I do think that a lot of us think that the Titans are going to find a way to upset one of these teams that they simply should not have any business of beating. And you look at a game next week where the Texans are most likely coming off a beating of the Dallas Cowboys, going to be heavily favored in this divisional game. Could this be a game where, the Texans are on a short week? There's a lot of voodoo about CJ Stroud being a big favorite and how he's a letdown in those games. Like, this is a game where, if you see the Titans play like they did in this game, maybe minus some of the penalties and some of the execution things, and he goes out there and he has a game like he did, do we start to see more people have that conversation? And especially in a game like this, where we know for a fact now that it matters more to your owner. Like if we see Will Levis, who many believe like the ownership had a part in like choosing this quarterback, he goes down there and upsets the Houston Texans. I think it's impossible not to start having the conversation about Will Levis in 2025.
Yeah, and it's interesting because if you look back at two of the things that we never really questioned about Will Levis, and it was his work ethic and his competitive drive. Like the guy just super competitive, wants to win, he works really hard. That's a good foundation. We always talked about it as a good foundation. Well, now we didn't really see the production. We didn't see the results earlier on in the season, but those things might be leading to him getting more comfortable within this offense. The reps might be helping him see things a little bit differently, maybe slowing things down a little bit for him. And it's because of those things that we might even be talking about this at this point, is that he keeps working and he believes in himself. And, you're seeing the fruits of that labor perhaps in these last two games. And if it keeps growing, well, then great. We can have an even bigger conversation about Will Levis on down the road. But I keep coming on this show. I keep writing about it. And people call me crazy. It's just spin. I'm being too positive, that sort of thing. But I think if you just watch the tape and you see the flashes of good in this offense, it just feels to me like this unit is really close to turning the corner. And you factor out the penalties, and you factor out like the boneheaded plays, the turnovers from the beginning of the season. Will Levis is a part of that too. And I think those big plays that we saw against the Vikings are things that we wouldn't see Mason Rudolph making. Remember when that was the conversation, JT? It's Mason Rudolph gives this team the better chance to win. But Mason Rudolph wasn't hitting throws like that one to Nick Westbrook.
Mason Rudolph, you could probably give Mason Rudolph the same look 10 times.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's hitting that ball to NWI once.
Yeah. I mean, and that's totally fair. Like that's the dynamic that Will Levis gives you. That is the explosiveness that he adds to the offense that looks like at this point, it's just a matter of getting reps, because the more reps that he seems to get, the more in command of this offense he seems, the more explosive the offense seems, the more efficient it seems to be running. Like it's there on the tape. The combination of play design, Brian Callahan's cleaned up a lot of the play calling issues that we've been critical of on this show. Haven't had any of those like head scratchers, like what was the thought process for this in a couple of weeks. Like he's getting better. The offense is getting better. Will Levis is getting better. It just feels like this team is heading towards a moment where it's going to turn a corner, and they're going to upset one of these teams that they shouldn't. And I think that should buy this regime a little more time. Like this, it's not all. I know this is a 2-8 team, but when you look at where Will Levis and this offense is headed, I think there's reason to be excited if you're a Titans fan.
I do think so too. I think also from a strategical look at it, as we get a bunch of comments here to end off the show, Defont saying, I think we hang on to Levis regardless. Cheap $2 million contract and picking a premium edge would do wonders. Edge, then wide receiver, then right tackle. You could go Travis Hunter. There's so many more needs on this team at premium positions that are going to be better than the quarterback class here. And we've seen time and time again, would the Steelers be better off not picking Kenny Pickett and making one of those other decisions that teams simply or seemingly got around that? Like that's the decision there. And then you add saying one more year of Levis, you fill the holes you couldn't this year. And then if it fails, at least you have a team ready to support the next quarterback in a class, mind you, that probably has better talent coming out. Like if Garrett Nussmeier doesn't come out and maybe he's able to develop another year in that system, like he could be a guy. You can talk about 2027 and Arch Manning, but I'm not sure that's feasible at this moment, because I don't think we should be talking about things 3 years away. However, like I do think that, Jay Nelson also brings up a good point here where the team is galvanized behind Callahan. I think that it's undeniable to the fans. I think it's undeniable to us in the room. This is a team that has not given up on their head coach. And I don't think their play has given him reason to yet. And so to top it all off here, Jay Nelson also is saying, ball knowers agree with you, Stoney. Bones of the offense have been good, and it looks very solid right now outside of gestures at right tackle. Time away was clearly good for Will. I think that he says they're going to win Sunday. I wouldn't, I don't think it's 50-50, but I do think there's a legitimate shot that the Titans could come out and surprise some people here. We'll do one little topic of draft talk here so far. As Zedine says, if Levis is the guy, who is the top offensive tackle in this year's draft right now, Stoney? Because you probably have done this. I have no idea.
We've done so well to be positive and provide people silver linings on this show. This is not a good offensive tackle draft. It's just not. I mean, Will Campbell is my top offensive lineman right now, and I stop short of calling a player soft, but there is a soft quality to his game that I don't particularly like. I think he would probably be my 7th or 8th ranked offensive tackle if he were to have come out in last year's class. Would you put him above or below Tyler Guyton last year? Oh man, Tyler Guyton's actually, I was not a big Tyler Guyton fan. I would have probably had him just above Tyler Guyton, but he would have been in that range for me. I think Tyler Guyton was my 8th ranked offensive tackle last year. So yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of Will Campbell. And then there are a ton of guys, like you read the prospect list, and everybody has offensive tackle Kelvin Banks, the kid from Minnesota. There's the kid from Arizona. All these guys that are tackles right now that you watch them play and you're like, yeah, no, that's a guard. That's an offensive guard at the NFL. I do like Emory Jones Jr. out of LSU. He is their right tackle. I think he's really good with his hands. There's some issues with the range. I think he's a little inconsistent in getting out in pass protection, but I think he has like the size and the technical acumen that you look for in a prospect. I just don't know. There's not a guy. If they end up with a top 5 pick, there's not a guy at that value that I want them in that situation. Go with an edge rusher, get you an Abdul Carter, get you a James Pierce Jr., and then wait to the top of the 2nd round. And maybe Emory Jones Jr. is there. Maybe you give a guy like Jonas, the kid from Arizona, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Maybe you give him a shot at right tackle before moving him to right guard. This kid from UConn, I talked about watching a little bit of his tape over the weekend. I think he's pretty good, a day 2 kind of pick. Like, it might be that type of situation where you're getting a premium player, whether it's edge, whether it's like Luther Burden III in the top 5, and then wait on that right tackle until day 2, because I just don't see a whole lot of value with the record as bad as it is. If it holds that way and they end up in the top 5, I don't see a lot of value at tackle in this draft class.
Yeah, there you have it. And I'm sure we will be so much in on that as we get closer to, like your hat says, the Reese's Senior Bowl towards the end of the season. Can't wait for that. I continue to say, like, I have no idea what I'm saying or talking about right now in terms of draft prospects. I like to watch and cover the big boy football, like the National Football League. But
You're so cool for that. You're so cool
hey
for
man,
that too, JT.
I try. But once January comes around, it's hitting the tape heavy, and I can't wait to do that and so much more. Thank you to Sinkers Beverages and Bluegrass Beverages once again, like my hat says, for sponsoring the show. Search them up on Uber Eats, Sinkers on Uber Eats. They deliver the booze to you so you can drink, and they drive it to you. Thank you to them again. That's going to do it for the Hot Read podcast today. We'll be back on Friday breaking down the Titans matchup with the Houston Texans this week. And until then, this has been the Hot Read podcast. We will talk to you Friday.